It happened on a Tuesday afternoon, the kind of day that feels too ordinary to hold anything extraordinary. The streets were alive with noise, people rushing, engines roaring, life moving too fast to notice small acts of cruelty. But that day, one moment stopped everything. A businessman, sharp suit, polished shoes, and a voice dripping with arrogance, decided to humiliate a delivery worker in front of everyone. Maybe he thought no one would care. Maybe he thought his money made him untouchable. But what he didn't know was that justice sometimes rides on two wheels. The crowd froze as the businessman's words cut through the air, sharp and humiliating. The young delivery worker stood silent, clutching his worn-out helmet, his pride shattered before strangers. Some people looked away. Others whispered, but no one spoke up. No one. Until the deep rumble of motorcycles echoed from the distance, a sound that made the ground vibrate and hearts skip a beat. 3 bikers, leather-clad and silent, pulled up to the curb, their eyes hidden behind dark visors. They had seen everything. The businessman scoffed, pretending not to notice them. But the atmosphere shifted instantly. There was something about the presence of those men, calm yet commanding, that made even the boldest voices fall quiet. One of the bikers stepped forward, slow and deliberate, removing his helmet. His gaze met the businessman's, steady and unflinching. "You think respect is about titles," he said softly, almost too calm. "It's about how you treat people when you think no one's watching." The words hit harder than any punch could. The crowd began to stir. The tension in the air felt electric, like justice itself had come alive in leather and steel. The businessman tried to laugh it off, but his voice trembled. The delivery worker stood frozen, torn between gratitude and disbelief. The lead biker didn't raise his voice, didn't threaten. He just stood there, unshaken, his silence heavier than the businessman's entire ego. The truth was clear. Power doesn't come from wealth, but from character, and character was something money could never buy. In that moment, something remarkable happened. The same people who had been silent began to speak. A woman stepped forward, confronting the businessman. Another man offered to pay for the delivery that had sparked the argument. The tide had turned, not through violence, but through courage. And as the bikers revved their engines, ready to ride off, the crowd watched in awe, because sometimes the loudest lessons are taught not in words, but in the quiet presence of those who still know what it means to stand for what's right. The businessman tried to brush the moment off, waving his hand as if the humiliation he had caused were nothing more than dust on his expensive suit. But the delivery worker's eyes told another story, one of swallowed pride, long days, and a lifetime of being treated as invisible. The bikers saw it all. They recognized that look, because each of them had lived it before, being underestimated, judged, dismissed by people who believed their worth was measured by wealth instead of heart. And that was when something inside them shifted. Not anger, but purpose. The lead biker approached the delivery worker slowly, lowering his helmet so the man could see his face. "You okay, brother?" he asked, voice low with sincerity. The delivery worker hesitated, unsure whether to speak or stay silent, as he had always been taught to. Finally, he nodded, though his trembling hands revealed the truth. The biker rested a firm hand on his shoulder, a simple gesture, yet powerful enough to steady him. That touch was a reminder that he wasn't alone, that someone saw him, respected him, valued him. Sometimes, that's all a man needs to remember his own strength. Meanwhile, the businessman scoffed, trying to reclaim control of the situation. "Are we really doing this?" he said, rolling his eyes. "He's just a delivery guy. He should learn to handle a little criticism." The words struck the bikers like a blade drawn too fast. One of them stepped forward, a towering figure with calm fury simmering beneath the surface. "Criticism," he repeated softly. "What you did wasn't criticism. It was cruelty." The crowd murmured, heads turning, the pressure shifting entirely toward the businessman. For the first time, he looked unsure. The second biker, older and quieter, spoke next. His voice carried a weight that came from living decades on the road, seeing people at their best and worst. "You think success gives you the right to step on someone who's working twice as hard as you ever have?" he asked. "You don't know what this man carries. You don't know his days, his nights, his battles." Each word hit the businessman with the force of truth, stripping away the armor of arrogance he wore so proudly. The delivery worker watched, his posture slowly straightening, as if these strangers were rebuilding him piece by piece. By now, the crowd was no longer passive. People stepped forward, recounting moments they had witnessed, times when the businessman belittled others, used his status as a weapon instead of a tool. His carefully crafted image cracked in front of him. The lead biker turned back to the delivery worker and said softly, "People like him think you're the bottom, but you're the backbone. Without men like you, this whole city collapses." The crowd nodded, voices rising in agreement. And for the first time all day, the businessman fell silent. Not because he chose to, but because he had nothing left to say. The businessman's confidence drained as quickly as the crowd's courage grew. He stepped back, realizing that the power he once wielded so effortlessly had vanished the moment people saw him for who he truly was. The bikers didn't need to raise their voices or their fists. Their presence alone, steady, grounded, unwavering, did what humiliation and shouting never could. It revealed truth. The delivery worker watched the shift with disbelief. Those same people who had watched silently moments before were now standing beside him, defending him, lifting him up. It was a sight he never imagined he'd see. The lead biker turned to the businessman and said, "You measure people by what they wear, what they earn, or where they work. But real worth doesn't come from any of that." He stepped closer, his voice calm but firm. "Real worth is measured by how you treat others, especially the ones who can't do anything for you in return." The businessman swallowed hard, unable to meet the biker's gaze. The truth hung in the air like a verdict, simple, undeniable, and devastating. Sensing the moment, the third biker walked to the delivery worker and asked, "Do you want to stay here today and let this define you? Or do you want to walk out of here holding your head high?" The delivery worker looked at his worn-out helmet, then back at the businessman whose insults had cut so deep. Slowly, he lifted his chin, drawing a shaky breath. "I'm done letting people like him tell me who I am," he said. Those words weren't loud, but they carried the strength of a man reclaiming something he had lost long ago, his dignity. The crowd erupted in applause, soft at first, then growing into a wave of support that washed over him. The businessman, overwhelmed by the sudden shift in power, tried to leave, but the lead biker stepped aside, blocking his path, not with aggression, but with a quiet finality. "You don't get to walk away like nothing happened," he said. "You owe this man something you've never given anyone before: respect." The businessman hesitated, his pride warring with shame, but the weight of the moment crushed any resistance he had left. And so, in front of the entire street, the businessman did something he had never done in his life. He apologized. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. The delivery worker accepted it, not because he needed validation, but because he was finally standing on equal ground. The bikers nodded in approval, engines rumbling softly as they prepared to leave. The crowd parted for them, not out of fear, but out of reverence. They had reminded everyone of a simple truth, one often forgotten in the rush of modern life. Kindness is strength, and standing up for others is the bravest thing any person can do. As the bikers prepared to ride away, the delivery worker stood frozen, watching the moment slip from shock into realization. What had happened wasn't just justice, it was transformation. He felt taller, steadier, as if the weight he had been carrying for years had finally been lifted. The lead biker approached him once more, lowering his voice so only he could hear. "Brother, don't ever forget this," he said. "People will try to break you because they think you won't fight back. But strength isn't about fists. It's about knowing your worth, even when someone tries to bury it." Those words sank deep, filling the cracks where humiliation once lived. The businessman lingered at the edge of the scene, his posture stiff, his breathing uneven. For the first time, he looked truly small, not because anyone made him feel that way, but because he had finally faced the reflection of his own behavior. A few people murmured around him, their eyes no longer impressed by his suit or reputation. Respect, once automatic, had evaporated like mist. The difference now was clear. He wasn't feared, admired, or envied. He was simply seen, and what people saw wasn't strength, but insecurity wrapped in luxury. One of the bikers walked up to him, not with hostility, but with a cold honesty that cut deeper than anger. "You know," he said, "men like you don't wake up cruel. You become cruel by forgetting other people matter." The businessman tried to respond, but the biker raised a hand gently. "Today wasn't about shaming you. It was about reminding you that who you choose to be from here on out, that's your real legacy." The businessman's eyes dropped, shame carving lines across his face. For a man who built his life on image, this moment was the first time he confronted substance. Meanwhile, the delivery worker's co-workers began to gather around him. One clapped him on the back, another offered to help finish his deliveries, and a few simply stood by his side, a silent symbol of solidarity. For years, he had felt like he was walking through life unseen. Another face in a uniform, another nameless figure in a city too busy to care. But now he understood something powerful. Being invisible doesn't make you insignificant. Sometimes, it only means people haven't learned to look properly. The bikers started their engines, the deep rumble echoing like a heartbeat through the street. As they rode off, the delivery worker realized they had left behind more than justice. They had left behind a spark, a challenge to everyone who witnessed the moment. A reminder that kindness is courage, that speaking up is strength, and that dignity belongs to every human being, no matter their job, their income, or their place in life. And as the sound of the motorcycles faded, the street felt different, braver, kinder, awake. Hours later, the businessman walked into his office building, but for the first time, the marble floors and glass walls didn't comfort him. The day's events replayed in his mind, each moment sharper than the last. He remembered the delivery workers' trembling hands, the crowd's judgmental stares, and the calm, unwavering truth in the bikers' voices. It was as if someone had held a mirror up to his soul, and he didn't like what he saw. Sitting alone in his corner office, he felt a heaviness settle into his chest, one he couldn't ignore. For once, money couldn't quiet it. Meanwhile, the delivery worker went home with a sense of pride he hadn't felt in years. His small apartment felt different, warmer somehow. He set his helmet on the table and stared at it for a long moment. It wasn't just a helmet anymore. It was a symbol of everything he endured, everything he pushed through, and everything he had reclaimed. That day, he didn't just survive humiliation, he overcame it. And his confidence wasn't loud or aggressive. It was quiet, steady, and impossible to break. Across the city, the bikers gathered at their usual spot, a small bar tucked between old brick buildings. None of them bragged about what happened. They didn't need to. Their actions weren't meant for glory, but for principle. The lead biker leaned back in his chair, staring at the fading sunset. "Funny thing about respect," he said. "It's free to give, but it's the most expensive thing you can lose." The others nodded, understanding deeply. They had lived enough life to know that true strength isn't in muscle or money, but in character. Back at the businessman's office, he finally picked up his phone and scrolled through emails he had ignored for months. Messages from employees asking for help, concerns he brushed aside, apologies he never made. He felt the weight of every missed opportunity to be better. And for the first time, he didn't make excuses. Instead, he stood, walked out his office, and headed back toward the street where it all began. Not for redemption from others, but for redemption from himself. When he arrived, the delivery worker was locking up his bike. The businessman approached cautiously, humbled. "Can we talk?" he asked. The delivery worker hesitated, then nodded. What followed wasn't an apology for show or reputation. It was a conversation between two men who finally understood each other's humanity. And in that quiet exchange, something remarkable happened. Not forgiveness forced, but forgiveness earned. A small spark of healing. Proof that change is possible even for the proudest hearts, when truth finally reaches them. In the days that followed, the city seemed to breathe differently. Word of what happened spread quietly, passed from one person to another like a whispered reminder that dignity is not a privilege, but a right. The delivery worker noticed a shift first. People began greeting him with genuine warmth, not pity or awkward politeness. Store owners nodded respectfully. Strangers held doors open for him. It wasn't the grand gestures that mattered, but the simple acknowledgement of his humanity, something he had long forgotten to expect. Each interaction reminded him of the biker's words, "You're the backbone." And slowly, he began to believe it. The businessman's transformation was slower, but deeper. He found himself replaying the moment again and again. His own voice, sharp and cruel, contrasted with the quiet strength of the bikers. Their words echoed inside him like a stern lesson from life itself. For years, he had mistaken arrogance for power, control for confidence. But now, he saw the truth in painful clarity. His success meant nothing if it came at the cost of compassion. Bit by bit, he began rebuilding. Not his image, but his integrity. He started by addressing his employees one by one, listening to concerns he had dismissed for too long. His apologies were tentative at first, but sincere. And sincerity, even fragile, can move mountains. One afternoon, he visited the delivery company where the young man worked. The employees watched with curiosity and suspicion as he asked to speak with the delivery worker. Instead of demanding attention, he waited, quiet, humble. When the delivery worker stepped forward, the businessman extended a brand-new insulated food bag, sturdier and professional grade. "I know a gift doesn't fix everything," he said, "but it's a start. You deserve the tools and respect that match your effort." The delivery worker accepted it with a cautious smile, surprised by the sincerity in the businessman's eyes. For the first time, the businessman didn't see a delivery guy. He saw a man who worked harder in a day than he did in a week. Elsewhere, the bikers continued their rides through the city, unaware of the ripple effect they had started. People recognized them now, not as troublemakers, but as symbols of quiet justice. Drivers slowed down when they passed. Shop owners nodded appreciatively. But the bikers didn't ride for praise. They rode for purpose. Each mile reminded them why they did what they did. Not to intimidate, but to protect. Not to judge, but to uphold the dignity of those who seldom had a voice. And although they moved like shadows on steel, their presence lingered long after they were gone. One evening, as the delivery worker prepared to start another long shift, he heard the familiar rumble of engines. The three bikers pulled up beside him, their expressions calm and approving. He smiled, standing taller than he ever had. "You didn't come back for me, did you?" he asked, half teasing. The lead biker shook his head with a small grin. "No, brother. We came back for the road. But it's good to see you standing strong." The delivery worker nodded, understanding that their lesson wasn't about pride. It was about resilience. And as they rode off once again, he felt something powerful settle inside him. The realization that respect isn't granted by the world. It's carried by the soul. With time, the moment that had once shaken the entire street became something larger. A story told in whispers, shared between co-workers, repeated by witnesses who had felt the shift in the air that day. It became a modern reminder that ordinary people, when united, could challenge arrogance and injustice. The delivery worker found himself becoming an unintentional symbol, not of victimhood, but of quiet courage. He walked through the city with a new energy, his steps firm, his shoulders no longer weighed down by the fear of being belittled. It was as if the world had finally seen him, and once seen, he refused to disappear again. The businessman continued his journey inward, confronting shadows he had ignored for years. He attended meetings differently, spoke to employees differently, even looked at himself differently in the mirror each morning. The change wasn't perfect. No transformation ever is. But he had learned something priceless. Respect is not a gift you give when convenient. It is a responsibility. Slowly, trust began to rebuild around him, brick by careful brick. And though he still carried shame from that day, he used it as fuel, not to punish himself, but to become better. Pain, he learned, can be an extraordinary teacher when met with humility. Meanwhile, the bikers became legends on the road. Not because they sought fame, but because people admired what they represented, strength used not to intimidate, but to uplift. They continued to ride across neighborhoods and highways, watching the world with the eyes of men who had lived enough darkness to recognize injustice instantly. Wherever they went, they carried an unspoken code: protect the overlooked, defend the vulnerable, and remind the world that kindness is not weakness, but power. One afternoon, weeks after the incident, the delivery worker crossed paths with the businessman again at a coffee shop. This time, the encounter was not tense or bitter. They exchanged a nod, simple, human, equal. The businessman approached him, not with apology, but with gratitude. "You changed me," he admitted quietly. The delivery worker smiled and answered, "No, the road just showed you who you really want to be." It was a simple exchange, but it marked the final thread in a story woven with humility, courage, and unexpected redemption. And somewhere far off, on a stretch of open road, the bikers rode into the fading light. They would never know how deeply their actions shaped the people they left behind. But in every heart they touched, in every spark of dignity they reignited, their presence endured. Because some lessons don't need to be shouted, they need only to be lived. And the lesson they taught that day was one the city would remember for a long, long time. Real strength isn't loud. Real strength is righteous. Real strength stands up so others can rise. Life has a way of returning to its rhythm, but some moments never quite fade. They linger, shaping the people who live them. The delivery worker found that truth unfolding quietly in the weeks that followed. Every time he fastened his helmet or picked up an order, he carried himself differently. Customers noticed. Coworkers noticed. Even strangers sensed it. His confidence wasn't loud, yet it radiated. An inner strength forged not from confrontation, but from being defended when he felt defenseless. That kind of validation, rare and profound, had awakened something inside him that no insult could ever break again. The businessman, too, discovered that change often begins with discomfort. He started making small but meaningful adjustments, greeting people by name, treating service workers with genuine respect, listening instead of commanding. Each effort felt awkward at first, as if he were relearning humanity, one gesture at a time. But he committed to it, determined not to revert to the man he had been. Whenever frustration or old habits surfaced, he remembered the gaze of the bikers, the kind that looked straight through him and saw the emptiness beneath his arrogance. That memory kept him honest. It kept him humble. One late afternoon, he found himself standing at the window of his office, watching a courier parking his bike below. Something in that small, ordinary moment hit him harder than expected. These people keep the city running, he thought, and I never saw it. His chest tightened, not with regret alone, but with a newfound sense of responsibility. The man he had been would have ignored that realization, but the man he was becoming couldn't. He turned away from the window with a silent vow. Never again would he use his voice to diminish someone who was simply doing their job. Meanwhile, the bikers continued to ride, quiet guardians slipping through city streets and forgotten alleys. They were seen as rebels by some, heroes by others, but in truth, they were neither. They were men shaped by hardship, who understood that the world often failed those who worked the hardest. And so they made it their mission to step in, not to punish, but to balance the scales when decency slipped out of sight. They never sought thanks. They never asked for recognition. Their reward was the simple knowledge that no injustice went unanswered on their watch. One evening, as dusk painted the sky in shades of amber and violet, the delivery worker heard motorcycles in the distance. He looked up, half expecting to see the same trio from that unforgettable day. But these were different bikers. New faces, new stories, new storms trailing behind them. That's when he understood something profound. The men who helped him were part of something larger, a culture built on loyalty, honor, and standing up for those who couldn't always stand up for themselves. Justice, he realized, wasn't an accident. It was a legacy carried on the back of roaring engines and unspoken codes. Time continued its steady march forward, and the moment that had once lit up the entire street slowly settled into the city's collective memory, never forgotten, only softened by distance. But its lessons remained, etched into the lives of those who had witnessed it. The delivery worker noticed he no longer braced himself for disrespect. Instead, he met the world with quiet boldness, understanding that dignity isn't something others give you. It's something you refuse to lose. Each day felt lighter, not because life had changed, but because he had. The businessman's journey was far from over. Growth, he learned, wasn't a destination, but a constant act of choosing who he wanted to be. He began supporting local delivery drivers, tipping generously, pausing to offer water on hot days or shelter during storms. These gestures didn't erase his past, but they carved a path forward, one lined with humility and redemption. Sometimes, people from his office would whisper, "He's different now." And they were right. He wasn't trying to impress. He was trying to become someone he could finally respect. One weekend, he attended a community event organized by small businesses and service workers. There, surrounded by food carts and laughter, he saw the delivery worker again. This time, there was no tension, no imbalance of power. They spoke casually, even shared a laugh. It was a brief moment, but it held something sacred, the understanding that people can change, not because they are forced to, but because they choose to. The businessman left the event feeling lighter than he had in years. Sometimes forgiveness is given, sometimes it is earned, and sometimes it simply grows in the silence between two people who have learned enough to let go. The bikers, somewhere miles away, rode through twisting backroads and long highways, unaware of the lasting impact they had left behind. But that was the nature of their presence, a sudden storm that clears the air, then disappears into the horizon. They didn't stay to watch what they changed. They didn't need to. The road was their calling, and justice their compass. They knew there were other streets, other moments, other people in need of someone to stand beside them when the world tried to push them down. And so they rode, as they always had, into the distance. On a warm evening lit by street lamps and the hum of the city, the delivery worker finished a long shift and paused before mounting his bike. He took a deep breath, feeling gratitude simmer where frustration once lived. He didn't need the bikers to return for him, to remember their message. He carried it now, in his posture, his voice, his resolve. And as he rode off into the night, weaving through familiar streets, he felt something powerful settle in his chest. Not revenge, not pride, something far greater. The unshakable truth that every act of courage, every stand for dignity, every moment of kindness, creates a ripple that never really fades. Weeks turned into months, yet the ripple from that single afternoon continued to move quietly through the city. The delivery worker, once overlooked, once invisible, had grown into someone others sought out for advice or encouragement. New hires at his company often asked him how he stayed so motivated. He never mentioned the confrontation directly. Instead, he spoke about self-worth, resilience, and the importance of recognizing your own value, even when others don't. His words carried weight, not because they were loud, but because they came from a man who had lived both humiliation and healing on the same day. The businessman, still on his path of transformation, started attending community meetings, offering resources and support where he once offered criticism and condescension. He became more involved in programs that helped low-income workers, funding safety gear, training sessions, and local initiatives to ensure fair treatment for all laborers. People noticed the shifts in him not through speeches, but through action. Quiet, consistent, meaningful. Though not everyone forgave him instantly, many respected the effort. Redemption, after all, is not earned in a single moment. It's built in layers, like bricks laid with intention over time. One evening, while walking home, the delivery worker paused at the very spot where the incident had occurred. The street was calm now, bathed in the glow of streetlights that flickered like fading memories. He stood there for a moment, feeling the weight of time pressed gently on his shoulders. This was once the hardest place for him to revisit, yet now it felt like a monument, not to pain, but to growth. Everything had changed because a group of strangers refused to let injustice become silence. He let a small smile form as he whispered, "Thank you," to no one and everyone at once. Across the city, the bikers gathered at a campfire on the outskirts of town. They didn't talk about the past. Bikers rarely did. Instead, they shared stories from the road, tales of broken people they had helped, troubled kids they had guided, neighborhoods they had quietly protected. Their code wasn't written in any book, yet it lived in every choice they made. The lead biker stared into the flames and thought of the delivery worker, not as someone they saved, but as someone who reminded them why their mission mattered. The world was full of quiet injustices, and if men like them didn't step in, who would? Under the same sky, connected by roads and memory, both men, the delivery worker and the businessman, found themselves reflecting on how far they had come. Neither knew the bikers' names. Neither knew their stories. Yet both silently honored the men who had changed the course of their lives. And somewhere in the distance, The deep rumble of motorcycles echoed faintly across the night, as if reminding the city that justice never disappears. It just rides on to the next place it's needed. As the seasons changed, the city slowly forgot the details of that unforgettable day. But the people whose lives were touched never forgot its lesson. The delivery worker had grown into someone who carried himself with pride, still humble, still hardworking, but no longer weighed down by the fear of being dismissed or disrespected. He earned a new position at work, mentoring younger drivers and teaching them the same truth he had learned. No matter what you do, your work has value because you have value. His quiet leadership inspired others, forming a small but powerful culture of dignity among workers who once felt invisible. The businessman continued evolving, inch by inch, day by day. He became known not for his wealth or status, but for his sincerity, something he hadn't realized he was missing until that moment the bikers confronted him. He volunteered at food banks, funded community programs, and developed new policies within his own company to ensure that every employee was treated with respect. People didn't just see a changed man. They saw someone actively choosing humility over pride. And though he still carried the memory of his past mistakes, he used that memory as fuel to do better, to be better. One afternoon, fate crossed their paths again. The delivery worker was dropping off a package in an office building when the businessman spotted him. This time, the businessman walked toward him with a warm, genuine smile. "Good to see you," he said without hesitation. "Likewise," the delivery worker replied. The exchange was brief, simple, human, two men standing on equal ground. No bitterness, no tension, just mutual respect, built from a moment neither would ever forget. Across the country roads, the bikers continued their silent patrols, their wheels carving stories into the asphalt of countless towns. They never stayed long anywhere, but their presence was unmistakable. Whenever injustice flickered, they appeared like thunder rolling over the horizon. Unexpected, uninvited, but always right on time. They didn't need recognition or thanks. Their legacy lived in every life they nudged back toward dignity, every injustice they interrupted, every person they reminded that they mattered. And as the sun set over the city, painting the sky in strokes of amber and rose, a quiet truth settled over all the people touched by that single moment. Sometimes the smallest acts of courage create the greatest waves of change. A biker stepping forward, a crowd finding its voice, a worker reclaiming his worth, a man choosing humility after years of pride. That day didn't end with applause or celebration. It ended with transformation. And those kinds of endings, the ones written in the heart, are the ones that never fade. The city eventually returned to its usual rhythm, but something quiet and profound had settled beneath its surface. What began as a public humiliation transformed into a ripple of dignity that touched lives far beyond that single street corner. The delivery worker found strength where he once carried shame. The businessman discovered humility where he once held pride. And the bikers, silent guardians of respect, remained a reminder that courage often arrives in unexpected forms. Their stories crossed only for a moment, yet that moment held the power to reshape them all. Sometimes, the most ordinary places become the birthplaces of extraordinary change. As the dust of days settled, the lesson left behind grew clearer. Respect is not a luxury reserved for the powerful. It's a responsibility shared by everyone. And when one person chooses kindness over cruelty, others follow. That afternoon, the crowd discovered their voice. The delivery worker rediscovered his worth. The businessman rediscovered his humanity. What seemed like a confrontation was, in truth, a mirror held up to the world, showing how easily we forget that the people we overlook are the ones who keep our lives standing. The story reminds us that strength has many faces. Sometimes it rides a motorcycle. Sometimes it wears a delivery jacket. Sometimes it hides behind a suit that is desperate to change. But in all its forms, strength is revealed through character, not status. Through empathy, not intimidation. Through the simple act of standing beside someone who has no one else. And when courage passes from one heart to another, it creates a chain reaction that spreads far beyond the moment it began. If there is one truth this story leaves behind, it is this: you never know when you're standing in the moment that will change your life, or someone else's. But every word you speak, every choice you make, carries power. The power to wound, or the power to restore. The power to shame, or the power to lift. And when you choose to lift, even quietly, you become the spark that ignites someone else's strength. That is the legacy every person can leave, no matter who they are or where they stand. And if this story moved you, if it reminded you of the importance of respect, courage, and standing up for what's right, then stay with us. Subscribe to the channel, leave your thoughts in the comments, and share this message with someone who needs it today. Your voice matters more than you know. And together, we can keep these stories alive, inspiring more people to choose dignity over indifference, one act of courage at a time.